speech. Now I'd like to invite the first speaker for the negative to the floor.
Cool. Am I clearly audible?
Yep.
Excellent. In that case, I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. The strongest Pokemon in our Pokedex is comparative, because that's not what opening government or the only government did in this debate. I'm going to prove why this is a good idea to continue for Team Rocket both on a material and psychological level, and all of rebuttal will be integrated. Let's start with the material. Know that continuing to try and capture Pikachu is pretty much these guys' only chance at a meaningful subsistence. Know that they're literally Pokemon criminals. They're notorious kidnappers who are committing crime within the Pokemon world, which means that insofar as they re-pivot from trying to capture Pikachu, they can't really be competitive Pokemon trainers and be accepted at gyms and competitions. They can't really work at a Pokemon center. Like, the Pokemon world has police. Insofar as these people have lived their life of crime and government literally concedes they have committed repeated acts of terrorism, at best, at the point where they abandon this mission, they're criminals on the run trying to run away from the police. I think this kind of excludes the idea of collaboration with Ash, and I'm also unsure if they do collaborate with Ash insofar as government bases their case on them being fixated on winning, why they wouldn't be simply tempted to try and capture Pikachu again and therefore destroy the relationship with Ash. That's something they should probably answer in their second speech. Know that Giovanni actively hates them and thinks they're incapable. He literally keeps them on board for this mission alone. At the point where they abandon the mission, they also abandon the only guy who is willing to hire them and provide them with some money, because given government's characterization of how incapable they are of capturing Pikachu, and given the plot armor that all the positive characters have within the series, they're incredibly unlikely to be able to work anywhere else or get any other kind of subsistence. This, for me, this is their only chance to retain a job and have a life within the Pokemon world. But let's move on to the psychological analysis. First of all, not being able to catch Pikachu symbolizes all of the failures that they have had so far. They're already also incredibly self-aware characters, right? They very often engage in self-deprecation. They very often engage in reflection as to what happened and whose fault was it that they have failed. So abandoning this mission, abandoning the idea of catching Pikachu, would be a final admittance of failure. This is a regret that they would never be able to get over. They would consistently play a blame game. On that particular mission, you were the one who failed in this way, or on that particular mission, you were the one who failed in that way, because they would constantly be reminded that the one thing they centered their lives around was not something they were able to do. The problem with the government team in this debate is they say Team Rocket wants to win, but they never engage in the analysis of how Team Rocket wants to win. Team Rocket has dedicated their lives to winning by capturing Pikachu, at the point where they admit their failure, and admit it to that extent that they collaborate with the person who has beaten them, and they're consistently reminded by the presence of Pikachu that they are so close but cannot try and capture him because they know he will fail, will be an incredibly shameful moment for them. So if they want to co-opt, if you want to run shame, we can co-opt it on our side of the house. But note that also this has become a practically morbid fixation for Team Rocket. All that they do, all that they think about is continuing and to try and capture Pikachu. This has been internalized as the crux of their identity. It's incredibly unclear from government why they would be able to repivot or why they would want to repivot. The analysis of how they go through repeated humiliation literally concedes and strengthens our point, because it shows you that consensually, even though they can leave, even though they can quit the job, they don't have to submit themselves to Giovanni's humiliation, they still continue to do this because they have a fantasy of finally succeeding and because this is the goal of their lives. The fact that they are willingly consenting into this proves to the government's own analysis they will not be able to repivot. Even if they keep failing, we think this is potentially a good thing, because it continues to perpetuate the production of meaning. As long as they fail, as long as there's another episode when they can try again, as long as there's another adventure on which they can go, they have a final goal. They have a final meaning they're striving towards. It's unclear on government why that goal would be or why they would buy into this goal. But also in Giovanni, know that these guys' primary coping mechanism is their fantasy of Giovanni's reaction once they succeed. Giovanni promoting them, Giovanni patting their heads, Giovanni making Meowth his favorite cat. This is the thing that they survive on. They go and humiliate themselves before him because they believe that in the end they're going to be able to make him happy. At the point where they abandon this coping mechanism and the fantasy falls apart, this is where the failure becomes real, because there's no fantasy to fall back on, which makes them psychologically unable to engage in the repivoting government wants to engage them with. But also, let's take a look at their relationship. These are people who don't have another support structure in their life. So Jessie came from a foster home. James is estranged from his rich family and he thinks they're dumb. Meowth is a weird talking Pokemon who works with criminals and like he's considered kind of, odd in the Pokemon world. They're essentially the only support structure that they have for each other. A life centered around trying to catch Pikachu continues to center them around this support structure. It keeps them together. As long as they have adventures and mutual missions, this means that they're consistently close and have to collaborate with the only people who actually understand them and with the only people who actually care about them. Their life is a consistent cycle of lads on tour. If they were to leave that life, it's unclear what support structure they would be able to access, specifically because their relationship breaks down at the point where they leave this mission. Know that Jessie's mother worked for Team Rocket and failed in her missions. Jessie, being the leader of the team, has a feeling of obligation towards her mother to succeed where she hasn't and to vindicate the family name. James failing in this mission would be him admitting to his parents psychologically and internally that he is indeed dumb and that he is indeed a failure and should have stayed with his family. Meowth failing in this mission would mean that he would never be Giovanni's favorite pet Pokemon cat. For all of them, failing this mission is an admission of deep internalized traumas regarding their prior life. At the point where that is true, this means that they're also incredibly likely to blame each other for that failure, because this failure also means they have to negate what they build their identity around and accept for themselves that they were unable to vindicate their family. If it's Jessie, their beliefs towards their family; if it's James, or their life goals; if it's Meowth. At the point where they do all of that, they're incredibly unwilling to want to continue a different life, but also incredibly unwilling to be able to perpetuate this support structure, which is in essence the only support structure that they have. Before I move on, I'm going to take a POI from Prop.
Jessie and James have never been caught by the police because they've just like empirically haven't. Why can't they just keep avoiding the police once they join forces with Ash?
Jessie and James haven't been caught by the police because they have the plot armor of them having to be in the next episode to try and catch Pikachu. At the point where this mission is removed and they just become ordinary criminals, I think also the Pokemon police becomes a lot more efficient. So if you want to use plot armor as a defense for Ash, I think I can use the same comparative defense for Team Rocket. So insofar as Ash exists in every episode and has to, Team Rocket also has to try and catch Pikachu. At the point where they stop doing this, the plot armor is uncomparative and also works on our side of the house. But lastly, note that Jessie and James have romantic tensions in between each other. I think that this is potentially a chance for them to like create a family that they've never had, to have someone that actually loves them, to be able to start something for themselves. But this is only true insofar as we do not create an incentive for them to blame each other for the failure of their mission, and we don't make each other them chronically depressed and on the verge of breaking down simply because they have to admit to themselves their failures and how this reflects their identity towards their family. But lastly, you know that if they catch Pikachu, which we agree is a minute possibility, but on the comparative, it's worth doing it for the rewards, because they would be catching one of the most famous Pokemon of one of the most famous trainers. This would mean that Giovanni finally gets to trust them. This means that new missions are opened up for them. This means they can gain more notoriety and finally achieve the goal of winning. Unless the prop can prove why Jessie and James will be 1, willing, and 2, able to repivot to their new identity, they have lost this debate a priori. For all of those reasons, vote for the opposition side.
Negative to the floor.
Oh, yes, fuck, that's working. Oh, shit. Hello. Sorry, technology is not my thing. I was, thank you. Right. Grant. Sorry, it didn't look like the camera was working, and I was like, what the yeah. Perfect. Okay. Right. Sorry, where's that last page? There we go. Okay. Right, sorry guys, this is my entire childhood, so I'm a bit giddy. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to do a lot of things in this debate. The first thing is go through each of their counterfactuals, show why their intention and why both are worse. Secondly, going through each point of their analysis, which I'll broadly label deterrence, and do 2 things. Firstly, explain why they can conceivably beat Ash, and secondly, why even if they can't, it's not overwhelming given the context in which they exist. Thirdly, substantive analysis, showing that the way that they form their identities is central to this, expanding on Tid's analysis, but crucially emphasizing, which is already true in the context of this debate, that we can repeatedly fail and still want to do this. That context doesn't matter, so it takes on an analytically prior burden. Then thirdly, maybe expanding a bit on the romantic stuff because I kind of feel like it. Okay, firstly, on their first counterfactual, okay, they will go and become other criminals, which is more likely for 2 reasons. Firstly, as a consequence, as Tin outlines, of the fact that they have literal records where they blow things up and literally engage in large-scale acts of terrorism, meaning that there are probably warrants out against them. Secondly, as a consequence of the fact that this is probably all they know to some extent, meaning that over time, the skills that they've built up are probably things that don't transfer immediately to other jobs. Often when people leave lives of crime, they find it very hard to return to normalcy because there's less of the excitement. 3 reasons this is better. Firstly, Giovanni's organization has contacts within the police that prior to this would have protected you, that you probably lose, meaning you're more likely to get caught. Secondly, when you're individually, other organizations and criminal gangs are unlikely to work with you for two reasons. Firstly, because you were likely in conflict with them at multiple points. This is like literally just canon in the Unova region and stuff. There were constant clashes between the villains, which is often why they support Ash. They've literally alienated large swaths of other criminal organizations that aren't going to work with them. Secondly, because of the risk. They don't know if they can trust you because you worked with another cartel functionally, meaning that you might leak information back to Giovanni who you're still loyal and could be an internal spy. This means two things. Firstly, you're just likely to be paid substantially less. Secondly, you're likely to face substantially more risk and still be targeted by these other individuals who want revenge without the protection of Giovanni, who to some extent is a deterrent because they don't want to start a turf war. Now you're on your own, you're free, you can literally die. Thirdly, because when you're on your own, you just have, like often when you're committing crimes individually without long-term or large-scale planning, often they're working with other people within the industry. You're just more likely to be caught if you're doing things like regular robberies for two reasons. Firstly, they likely have to do more of it to survive when they don't have a consistent salary, meaning the risk is exponentially increasing. And secondly, because they probably do things that are just substantially more obvious because of the fact that it isn't as long-term planning, probably easier to capture. This means two things. Firstly, either your life is just substantively worse at the point at which you're just hungrier, at the point at which you're just constantly more stressed, at the point at which you're constantly harming others and feel guilty about it, or you're in prison, which is probably the single worst thing that can happen to someone. Secondly, they're working with Ash, which I would note is in tension with the former thing, which is their like other counterfactual. Three reasons why this is probably worse. Firstly, like, look, okay, yeah, you've worked with Ash in the past, but if you're there consistently, there's probably a long run temptation based on Tim's analysis to kidnap Pikachu, meaning that probably breaks down, meaning that likely snaps. Secondly, as a consequence of the fact that you probably just engage in unorthodox behaviors. You don't necessarily go to work for him with the long run because you'll rely on old heuristics. You'll probably, things will be more morally normalized to you. You'll probably occasionally do bad things that mean that Ash probably doesn't want to work with you and will weigh those mistakes highly if he sees you hurting other people by mistake. Thirdly, as a consequence of the fact that resentment will probably build up over time within that group, as a consequence of the fact that you feel like Ash has literally taken away your chance of success, meaning that over the long run, the group is likely to break up and leave. Note that most of Ash's friends don't make it through a whole season and he gets new ones each time, not in all of them, but most of them precisely because they drift. This means that this is more likely to happen in this context where you all hate each other, meaning that you probably don't get the benefits of that, meaning that you probably resort to the criminal thing anyway. Thus, boom, problem gone. Okay, onto their analysis where they're like, right, okay, basically the thrust of this is that there is a deterrent effect that because of the fact that Ash has a lot of resources, right? That's the crux, and I'm going to go through it each by line. Firstly, Ash is good at it. Three obvious responses. Firstly, you can train yourself and often do. Team Rocket does not start at their initial power level that they are at the beginning of the series and at the end of it. They constantly work and get harder because they go through iterative battles, which is why they can still catch up with and engage with Ash. This means that they can constantly convince themselves there's a chance to do it next time. Secondly, because you have a series of tricks and other stratagems that you can employ that are occasionally effective. They occasionally do win in other areas, like when they get Togepi with to bring back to Giovanni, meaning that they probably overweight that, given that they want to succeed, and confirmation bias means that they'll tell themselves that that's likely to be successful. So when occasionally they use their stratagems, they're like, okay, it didn't work, but there's always a chance. Thirdly, because of the fact that you're just like, because of the amount of time that you've sunk into it, the probability of you winning does exponentially increase from the perspective of most individuals, because Ash has to be lucky every single time. You only have to be lucky once. Given that Tim's analysis is that you overweight the degree to which this is important, that one chance is something you're likely to overweight regardless, meaning this is important. Secondly, in the gym leaders, two fairly obvious responses. Firstly, the gym leader's primary responsibility is to stay within the context of their gym, precisely because they're working with other trainers who need to go through that to get accreditation, meaning they very, very rarely leave, so they're likely to stay there and not help you particularly much. Secondly, they often just get exponentially weaker as the show progresses, precisely because of the fact that Ash is overcoming them. They're literally staggered at different levels, meaning they're not all powerful, and Team Rocket is probably substantively more powerful than several of them. And also, they also have supports from other people within Team Rocket that are equally as powerful and have worked equally as hard, merely by the fact that in the Pokemon world, if you have a criminal organization, you have people to train and get better, and heavyweights that literally support you that they can likely access through working with them. Thirdly, as a consequence of the fact, if you just think about how big the fucking regions that they're in are, the gym leaders can't just boop over there, right? Like, you also have to know where Ash is, which you always can't do because you can't always contact him. Secondly, because of the fact that it would just take time to get there, and all Team Rocket has to do is get you once in a specific context, meaning that, like, if you're in the middle of a forest and they literally put a trap on you and you fall into a thing, it's not likely that fucking, a gym leader from the other end of the region is going to swoop in. Okay, that probably means that that's non-comparative. Your power probably doesn't matter that much. Thirdly, Professor Oak, he just stays in the town. Like, he just stays in the town. He has, like, research specializations, and I'll take the POI, yeah?
I fantasize about beating a side quest for like months and months, but I'm stuck on it. I know I can never do it. It causes me an immense amount of frustration. Why won't I just stop the side quest and finish the game?
Probably because you're not Team Rocket, and probably because, as Tin said, which wasn't responded to, you've substantively constructed your identity around this. You're playing a video game, they're engaging in their entire life. Professor Oak has a research specialization, meaning he has to stay in that area to consistently do research, and there's lots of other things. Secondly, a lot of the things that he gets are replicable. You can just go to shops and buy fucking hyper potions or steal them, meaning that you can scale up to the same degree. And secondly, Giovanni supports them. 3 reasons why it's not overwhelming. Firstly, the majority of this is just travel, right? You've iterated experiences with Ash, but you're literally traveling with your friends, seeing really nice things that constantly mitigate that. Secondly, because you have a support system and network of friends that share that experience, meaning that when you talk through your things, it means that you can overcome it. Thirdly, it's your mission. They literally concede that you've internalized a desire to win, meaning that within your organization, you're likely trained to overcome repeated failure, to constantly push yourself and be willing to sacrifice yourself. And through that training camp, mean that you've internalized this as something good. Fourthly, because it's escapism from the trauma that Tin outlines, which is a likely substantially higher cost to you given it's internalized from childhood. So this will always seem less relative to it. So you're already primed to deal with this. This has 2 effects. Firstly, it doesn't matter if it's overwhelming. Then finally, 1 line of analysis on why this matters, all of this. At the point at which it seems achievable from this, it's the moral center of your life. You're likely to pursue it at all costs. I beg you to oppose.
Encourage all members of the affirmative to message me their Pokemon Go friendship codes at some point after this debate. I'd now like to invite the final speaker for the negative to the floor.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Spectacular. Just give me 2 seconds. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I firstly want to talk about what our burden actually is in this debate and why we don't actually need to capture Pikachu to access all of the benefits that we talk about on our side. Then I want to talk about the characterization of winning that we get from government, show you why that is not necessarily a true characterization of these characters, and even if it is, the way that you vindicate those goals is by continuing to catch Pikachu. Then I want to deal with a different kind of factuals, talking about collaborating with Ash and the criminal life. Incredibly important to note here, we do not need to catch Pikachu to have the type of value. In fact, I would posit it is almost better if we consistently lose catching Pikachu, as Proposition tells us is going to happen. Why is this the case? Because the entire meaning that these characters have built up around their lives is the fact that they want to catch Pikachu. Literally in the info slide, it says this has taken on a symbolic importance to them over and above everything else within their lives. That means that at all times, and there is a possibility that they could catch Pikachu, and that's what they're engaged in, their lives have a direction. It has meaning, and something that they can focus around. Regardless of what problems they have individually, they can always tell themselves at the point at which they catch Pikachu, that will make their life better. Note, that is a crucial psychological bulwark that individuals need in their lives to have that form of direction. This is why in the real world we have the concept of victor's depression, where people get things that they have always wanted for their life and feel incredibly sad at the point at which they achieve it because they realized it was never as meaningful for them as it was when they were engaged in that fight. What that means is staying in the fight, constantly trying to catch Pikachu, is the best option for you as an individual because you always have the capacity to idolize what will happen at the point at which it occurs. But when you do catch Pikachu, at the point at which that happens, you are able to access all of the benefits of the things that you want. Giovanni finally respects you. You have finally shown, if you were James, to your parents that you are not a dumb idiot and you have the capacity to do this. Jessie finally feels connected to her mother. All of those things accrue, but even if you continue to lose, as Gov have tried to tell you, that has a huge degree of meaning and a huge degree of value to you as individuals. On the characterization of winning that we hear coming out of government. Firstly, I just want to note that it's consistently shown in the show and their overriding incentive is not, as governments say, to catch all the Pokemon. It is specifically tied towards Pikachu. One, because literally while we were having this debate, they constantly continue to focus on Pikachu to the exclusion of all other Pokemon. At the point at which it would always be strategically more useful for them to catch easier Pokemon, they always focus on Pikachu. That, I think, indicates that Pikachu is more important to them than just catching Pokemon generally. Two, the fact that, as Tin says in the POI, when they do things like teaming up with Ash, the justification for that is that it will make it easier for them to ultimately catch Pikachu because they want the world to continue to existing so that they can keep going on that quest. All of these things show you that they're not necessarily just trying to catch all the Pokemon, but specifically engaging in the fight with Pikachu. Secondly, even if we accept their idea that they overall want to win, the definition of winning is something that is incredibly vague and that is individuated to different people. For these individuals, because of the psychological analysis that we give, that I would note is never challenged along the proposition bench, the conception of winning for these individuals has become catching Pikachu. Meaning, if you believe everything the government tell you, that all these people want to do is win. Winning for them is catching Pikachu because they have associated that in their minds with some kind of ultimate victory. Thirdly, note that if you do what they want you to do, which is go off to Ash and try and catch more Pokemon, you never get to feel like a victor for a number of reasons. One, you're likely heavily demeaned within Ash's team because you are not particularly good at catching Pokemon. As they say, you have 3 people in your Pokedex, as against all of the people on Ash's crew who are incredibly good trainers, who all of their analysis show you are incredibly OP. All of that means you're probably the weakest members of these teams, and you're constantly reminded that you're not particularly good at this. 2, you probably ruin the vibe of the group because Ash does not like you very much because you are completely different people. Even if he is a generous guy, note the characterization of these individuals is incredibly rude, quite snipey, they're always mean to individuals, you like you don't fit in. That means you are constantly reminded that you're not actually able to fit in with these individuals. And anytime you do catch a Pokemon, the credit for that goes to Ash because he is the person who's on the quest to catch them all. He is the person who's getting the limelight. All of this exacerbated by the fact that he is your arch enemy that you have now turned over to. That means that if, as they say, you care about winning, this will feel like an ultimate failure. Fourthly, I want to note that what uniquely happens on their side is an absolute failure. Even if we constantly miss out on Pikachu, there's always the possibility that we could get him next time. That means we do not internalize this as a genuine failure because there's always the possibility of future success. Uniquely on their side, when they turn their back on Pikachu, except that is the one that got away, that is an absolute failure that will constantly haunt them because it is one thing that they were never able to do. If it is true, the proposition tell you that over and above anything, they care about winning at all costs. This is the worst thing they could possibly do because it's an absolute concession to the other side. Fifthly, note that even if they want to tell you that you will overcome the obsession with Pikachu and move past, by their own counterfactual, you are constantly reminded of your loss. You are literally working with the guy who has Pikachu. You are seeing him every day and realizing that you were never able to catch him, and he's literally on a fucking leash for Ash, and you have no capacity to actually engage with that. That is a constant trigger that reminds you of this ultimate failure, which by their own characterization is something that you would not want to happen. The best thing you can possibly do is stay with your group of friends, actually fighting this fight, actually doing this thing that has meaning. That is incredibly important. The next thing I want to say is just how important Pikachu is, because recognize it's not just catching Pikachu. For Jessie, it is reconnecting with the mother that she lost as a child, who, note, contextually was in the team that was trying to catch these Pokemon, meaning that there's a specific contextual characterization that draws you to want to engage with Pikachu. It's James trying to stand up to his family. It's Meowth trying to prove that he's the best cat Pokemon for Giovanni. All of that means they are not just engaging with Pikachu, they're engaging with all of the psychological trauma and all of these psychological investments throughout their whole life, specifically attaching to him. Note as well, there's also a self-fulfilling feedback loop, at the point at which they have constantly built in lots of ideas around how important Pikachu is to them. They constantly keep reinforcing that by playing blame games every time they lose. All of that means that they have built up an aura around Pikachu that attaches a huge degree of importance to him. That means it's incredibly important that they keep engaging with it, because it will lead to a complete mental breakdown if they turn their backs on it. Quickly, I will take a POI from the proposition.
Why can't they realize that there is meaning in life through winning more and protecting their Pokemon better, like we said, and then therefore change it or give up on Ash?
For all of the psychological reasons we have given you as to why they attach a huge degree of overimportance to Pikachu, the fact that it becomes a symbol of the families they never had, of proving themselves to other people, the fact that every time they go to Giovanni in shame, the one thing that makes that acceptable is knowing that someday they will get Pikachu and someday they will be able to win his approval. All of that means that Pikachu is uniquely important to these individuals. Finally, I want to talk about why their idea of collaborating with Ash is nonsensical, meaning that a priori they have no counterfactual that is positive in this debate, and even if they don't have an incredibly happy life, though I'm positive that they do, it's likely going to be incredibly bad because they'll be on the run. One, huge difference between Ash working with you in times of extremis and making you a part of his team. I would just posit that he will not want this influence in his life generally. Two, no incentive to do this because by their own analysis, Ash is way more powerful than you. You are literally not an asset to him. You have 3 Pokemon in your Pokedex. 3, at the point at which, as Caoimhin explains to you, you're likely to be on the run, you are a massive liability to him. This is why in real life, ex-members of the Mafia don't get jobs, because no one wants to have to engage with that. 4, note that Ash just probably doesn't get your vibe and doesn't engage with the way the team is talking about. That means you're likely to live a life on the run. They have tried to tell you that you won't get caught by the police, but note, as soon as you leave a criminal organization, that is when you get targeted. That is when your life gets worse. You need to fight for Pikachu. That is your overriding incentive. Oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and also encourage everyone on Negative, if they have Pokemon Go, to please send me the friend code. And congratulations to all speakers in that debate. One last round of applause spiritually for everyone. Okay, so now